not now visiting you physically in Italy. Would have loved to be there at the moment.
Streaming is starting.
Okay, thank you so much. So welcome everybody to our second ISMA panel called New Interactive Narratives in Virtual Reality. I'm Jens Hubert, and just a quick announcement, we will have this panel here for 1 hour, and afterwards you can meet the panelists in Gathertown in the Q&A track A at the Piazza. So please feel free to talk to them afterwards in Gathertown. And now let me quickly introduce the panelists. It's Miriam Vosmeer and Sky Leslie from Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, Marijn Mado from Stanford University, and Christian Roth from Utrecht University of the Arts. So thank you so much that you're here today. We're looking forward to a very interesting panel with all of you, and now the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jens, for the introduction. Thank you also for inviting us for this panel. We're really excited to be talking about it because this is something that our current research is very much into. So really happy with the possibility to share our thoughts and ideas and discussions with you in in sort of an international context. Shall we just start with sharing a screen, someone? So that we can immediately take off with what we would want to tell you. Chris, were you or Marijn, is any of you wants to share the screen? Then we can start our presentation.
Shall I do it, or is it you?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I see we have 32 participants.
Oh, wow. 32 already. Well, that feels like a normal panel group, right? And it's not too much. So everyone should feel invited to join our talk, because that's really what we hope for this panel as well. I mean, we're going to talk, I'm going to talk, and then my colleagues are going to tell you a little bit as well. But we really hope that people will feel invited and happy and secure to share their own thoughts. We'll be talking about virtual reality experiences, and we really do hope, but we also trust a little bit, that there's people here in the audience who have experienced at least one or two of them. So please don't hesitate to add your thoughts and experiences, because, well, I think it's for us only something that we'll be able to learn from. As I said, our current research at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and we work together with the Utrecht University of the Arts and even with Stanford University in the current project. We look a lot into virtual reality, and especially from the perspective of interaction. What kind of interaction is possible? Maybe the first slide. Yeah. Here we see a vision of the holodeck. Well, we probably all remember or all have some idea about who started it all. Our sort of the godmother of virtual reality, Janet Murray, who sort of tempted us with her ideas of holodeck. And it seems that since then, people have started to think about virtual reality as a place of sort of unlimited possibilities. You know, these discussions that you have. I mean, I have that with people in my surroundings and not my professional peers, but friends. When you tell something about your work, I'm doing research in virtual reality, and people will immediately start referring to, I have read this book, I've seen this movie. Is it possible, to enter a movie and do everything that you can? And yeah, that started to become a bit of a problem sometimes, because next slide. Because this was presented once as the future of narrative in cyberspace. Indeed, a way of interacting with a narrative that would be completely immersed, completely as if you're not even entering with a medium anymore, as if you and the medium are getting completely together. So yeah, this sometimes leads to disappointments. I'll be getting back to that a little bit later, but what I find really interesting, and that's why we're also impressed with the work of Janet Murray and the way that she sort of even develops her own thoughts, is that after sort of proposing to the world the possibilities and possible futures of narrative in cyberspace, in the last years, she also started to, I don't know, not warn is a big word, but reflect on the possibilities, but also what is not possible. Again, what I just said, because people seem to be going in all directions with their fantasies about VR. Next slide, please. I really like this quote that she, in 2017, so a couple of years ago, that was the time, you may remember it, when the world started to explode about VR, and that everyone and his mother thought that there would be a great opportunity to do stuff in VR, because VR would almost be like the solution to every possible problem. And that is when I thought Janet made a really good point, that she says, yeah, it's been oversold. You remember those days when all the commercial companies also dived, what do you say, into VR, trying to, use it for selling houses, for selling holidays, for selling what have you. But as Janet says, in that time, we were still at the equivalent stage of the invention of the movie camera. And that's what I always like to think, that while those the Lumiere brothers were quietly in their studio, tinkering a bit. So this happens. And when you put two pieces of movie together, you have an edit, and that happened without people immediately sort of jumping on their back and saying, okay, you've made movies. Can you now make an interactive documentary over this and that topic? So it seemed that the moment that virtual reality started to, well, in the last wave at least, started to become a little bit more mainstream, their immediately demands became enormous. And like Janet said, we still have to invent the conventions to fully explore VR's narrative capacities. And that's what we're trying to do in this panel, like going back to not what are the fantasies, but basically looking a bit at what is actually there at the moment, because then we'll see that there are enormous possibilities for storytelling, and also things that we may have not thought of before. Next slide, please. I really like the article that she wrote in 2020. Here we see, okay, this is a bit mean of me. I included here a picture of Janet Murray in 2020 when on Facebook she was sharing the development of her hair, because obviously, as anyone, she was not able to get a haircut. And she was sharing the pictures of how her hair kept exploding. So I'm not sure this is what she would like. So I'll ask you what happens in this in this ISMAR panel, stays in this ISMAR panel, right? At least about the physical appearance of Janet Murray, what she's talking about. Please share that, because we think that she's making good points. This is again what I just told you. People people are expecting sort of omnipotent representational powers, and leading a lot of people to overestimate the present and future of VR experiences, with, like, people getting disappointed because they put on a headset and they are not, in a complete interaction with a virtual video world, but things are, a bit less than that. In this panel, my colleagues are going to be presenting some VR experiences that do offer new ways of interacting. We'll be addressing a couple of questions, so, to give it some structure for you. We don't expect replacement of the real world, but what can we expect? Thank you. Next slide. A first question would be, who are you in this world? I mean, like in an ideal immersive experience, you'd just be you. But of course, for a writer, a developer, that's quite impossible to make you feel exactly like you. So who are you is an important question. I mean, I think it's interesting because, of course, the question, who are you, at least for me, it starts with Alice in Wonderland, Caterpillar asking you who you are. And that was repeated by the first VR experiences that really made a point, like, who are you and what doing here? Next slide, please. Who are you and why are you here? A Fisherman Tales gives you an interesting insight as well, because what am I doing here? I'm guiding this fisherman who is very big and very small, and giving this, in Dutch you would say, a droste effect, giving you the feeling that you're with him in all kinds of different dimensions. What am I doing here? I'm guiding the story forward. And so those are the first two questions. And the third question that we think is interesting, do you see me? Because again, in the ideal world, you would be seen as well, and the characters, protagonists in the world would respond to you. But of course, that's difficult as well, and it poses all kinds of interesting questions for VR developers. How can you give the user, the interactor, the feeling that she is actually there, that she is not the people at the Oculus Story Studio have called it the Swayze Effect, you know, when you feel so absolutely there, you are there, but at the meantime, no one sees you. You feel a bit like Patrick Swayze in Ghost. So how do we overcome the Swayze Effect? In the line, of course, for the people who've experienced it, you've got this last moment somewhere when the puppet actually looks into the camera, so to speak, and asks you, begs you to help him. So, do you see me? Yeah, you're being seen at that point. So these three questions are interesting to reflect upon the latest VR experiences and see that although we are not in a complete exact replacement of the real world, there's a lot of interesting things going on. So I invite my first colleague, Christian Roth, to reflect upon Wolves in the Walls. There you go, Chris.
Thank you, Miriam. Maybe a quick background. So yeah, I'm Christian Roth. My background is in media psychology and user experience design and evaluation, and I did a PhD on measuring the user experience of interactive narratives, interactive storytelling, whether it's in 2D, Pancake, or in VR. And now I'd like to discuss these questions that we just had on this case study, Wolves in the Walls. And before, I would like to ask you, who has actually experienced Wolves in the Walls? Oh, I wrote Wolves in the Walls. Wolves in the Walls. So maybe, I'm not sure if you are able to chat here.
Yes, I see people starting to respond. But yeah, there's at least one nope from Laura. So yeah, Chris, I'm afraid you'll have to tell a little bit about it.
Oh no, I mean, I will definitely. I'm just curious. Also, I want to get the audience a bit involved. So just shoot a yes or no if you want. I'll start explaining it a bit. So, Wolves in the Walls.
Can you raise a little bit the level of your mic, because the volume is almost.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Is this better? So I'm just coming closer to.
Slightly better.
Is anyone else experiencing this?
I hear you quite well, to be honest, but I don't know how the rest of our attendees are experiencing this.
Okay. If you could raise the volume a little bit, it would certainly help.
Noor said that they never heard about it. Yeah, well, then please, Chris, tell them about why we think this is so special.
I hope you can hear me better now. I will just raise my voice.
I do.
There's nothing else I can do. So Wolves in the Walls is like a 40-minute long interactive storytelling experience by Fable Studio. They're quite famous. And it's based on the children's book of the same name by author Neil Gaiman. So he's also very popular. And the interactor, the player, is in the role of an imaginary friend of main character Lucy. and she's an 8-year-old girl who hears these strange scratching wolves noises coming from behind of the walls in her family home. And the story is told mainly through following her around through the house, getting to know the family and their lives. They're very busy and they don't really care about Lucy's imagination. They just say there are no wolves in the walls. But since you are her imaginary friend, you actually share her imagination and you start to also hear the things that she hears. And so who are you? You are this imaginary friend. It becomes clear pretty early on. And what is very interesting is that first you just see the world. You cannot do anything. You just see Lucy telling you about this interesting house, but then she draws you in the air with chalk, just hands, and these hands become your hands, and all of a sudden you have agency. And that moment is so special, and I have not seen this done like this before, to introduce the player, the interactor to this world in such a nice way. Janet Murray speaks about scripting the interactor. It's very important that you understand, what is my role? What can I do? And the moment you have these hands, you become even more part of this world. And she hands you a camera and you're supposed to take a picture of her and maybe the wolves. Well, the suspicions prove to be right, and it becomes quite hectic. And you have different ways of interacting there, and these interactions are basically narrative mechanics that put the storytelling right into the things that you do yourself, and it's brilliantly done in that regard. I think this is the first part of introducing this game, and we will talk more about it later, but I think now it's time to introduce the next one.
Okay, then we move on to the next one. And the next one is Angels of Amsterdam. Well, and I don't blame anyone, I don't blame anyone anyway, but if you've never heard of this one, because this is brand new. It was presented, I think, only a week or 2-3 ago. It's an experience made by We Make VR in collaboration with iFilm Museum, which is all based in Amsterdam. But the great thing is that this experience is actually chosen for the Venice VR selection. So from the people who know, it has been rewarded, that it's interesting enough to be shown to the world. So we're actually very proud that we've already been able to experience this, and are basically capable of saying some things about it against the background of our questions. So Sky, can you please take the floor and give us some first ideas about what you think about Angels of Amsterdam?
Absolutely. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. I'm Sky, and as Miriam has just explained, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Angels of Amsterdam experience, and I'm going to address our central questions, which is, who am I? Do the characters see me? What am I doing here? And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the interactive elements and narrative elements, hopes for the medium, and new technologies. So as you can see here, I've got a little picture, and you can see various characters that are captured in volumetric capture. And the essential premise of the experience is that users enter a real cafe in Amsterdam that opened its doors in 1642, Café Het Papeneiland. And what happens is, when you put the headset on, you enter this cafe, and you experience 4 different characters. They're 4 different 17th century women who are trying their luck in booming Amsterdam. Now, what happens is you have sort of short vignettes of each of these characters, and then afterwards you get sort of more information about sort of the end of their tale, historically speaking. And what I'm going to focus on today is one character, because there's a just wealth of information presented in this piece. And we're going to focus today on Marietje Jans. Now, the basic story behind this is that Marietje Jans finds that she can't make enough money to survive as a woman in Amsterdam. So eventually she cuts off her hair, finds male-coded clothing, and renames herself David Jans. She eventually enlists as a soldier in the West Indies Company. However, when she falls ill with fever, her crew makes the discovery that David was in fact a woman. Now, the transformative process of Maritje becoming David is shown to us in Angels by observing a nude woman cutting her hair, dressing herself in a sailor's costume, and walking towards us as the viewer with a piece of parchment and a calligraphy brush. And what she does is she signs her name David deliberately while making eye contact with us as the viewer. So we're sort of a part of that whole transformative process. And she looks at us very meaningfully as she does so. Now, after the introductory scenes, so there are sort of various introductory scenes, we're shown more factual information while being presented with urns, which represent all of these women who have obviously since passed away. And the information that we receive on David is that after David fell ill with fever and was discovered to be a woman, her crewmates collected money and sent her back to Amsterdam to be married off and hopefully live a better life. So, what do we get with the interactive elements and what are our hopes for the medium and new technologies? Well, here's the interesting thing is that Angels markets itself as a VR experience that's both photorealistic and interactive, but it's also meant to remain accessible to audiences that are new to VR, which is very nice because you don't need to know a lot about it in order to sort of get the experience. Now, additionally, if you look at the image, you can see that these characters are captured with volumetric technologies, which are meant to give a sort of lifelike quality to the character. And it's very realistic for the medium, but as you can see from this image as well, it's not exactly real. So it's an approximation of realism in an immersive experience. So this does not necessarily take away from the experience, but as we were discussing earlier, claiming it to be photorealistic can create incorrect assumptions and can sort of drive disappointment in viewers who sort of were primed that it would be a one-to-one exactly the same as real life. So that's sort of interesting when you look at where volumetric capture actually is right now in terms of that technology. Now, interaction, on the other hand, was supposed to be driven by eye contact. So you were supposed to sort of enter, make eye contact with a character, and then they would speak to you or do whatever it was. But it was actually achieved in the end by staring at a dot above the eye or the character, so a dot like this. And eventually that would fill up, and then the next part of the scene would begin. Now, we were very, very lucky to be able to speak to the producers and sort of host a focus group on this. And what we found out is that apparently during user testing without the dot, users were unclear that it was their interaction that was making the characters move or do things. So they kind of assumed that everything just happened on its own. So they added a sort of UX in order to make sure that people knew they were interacting. But the interesting part here is that it's supposed to be a realistic experience with immersive qualities, but now we've added something that takes away from that realism. Now, on the other hand, so we have the interactive elements and sort of the technology side to it. Then we also have the narrative elements, and we have sort of engaging the senses and a bit about temporality. So what we found out when we ran this focus group is that David was considered one of the most relatable and intense characters out of the 4 women that I discussed in this piece. And this was sort of due to the eye contact that is made between the viewer and the character and the physical proximity. So as I described, David changing her hair and her outfit and walking towards you and looking you in the eye as she signs her new name. And there was also that task of look at my name, which made viewers feel more connected to the character themselves. Now, the character's plight was also more relatable to the average viewer, and the performance was clear in terms of both its intention and the narrative elements. Some of the other ones were more an interpretive dance or a sort of singing, screaming sequence. And it's wonderful when you can interpret things, but this one was something that was very clear, very easily understandable, and people felt very connected to that as they didn't need a lot of exposition in order to sort of interpret the situation they were viewing. Additionally, when it comes to engaging the senses, there was also music playing in the background as we watched Maritje become David. And the song that plays is, interestingly enough, reminiscent of old sailors' tunes, and you sort of hear chanting going, "Women are not welcome on the boat." And it's a wonderful song. It adds very much to the immersive experience, and it also explains the narrative further, sort of that women are not welcome, and you see her transform into David. Now, to address our initial questions of who am I, why am I here? Our role as a viewer seems to be to observe and make minimal contact. Yes, we have an interactive capability, but we don't speak, we don't have tasks, we simply observe. And a lot of viewers were sort of unencumbered by this, as we simply exist to view the short vignettes of various characters. And it seems like our role in this is to exist in the space and seek understanding for these various women who survived and attempted to thrive all the way back in the 17th century in Amsterdam. Now, interestingly, because of this, you are an observer, but you interact enough that you are sort of viewed by the character and you view the character as well, but you are not given a specific role to play. So you are effectively yourself in this place, in this time, and therefore are also not given the opportunity to reject an assigned role. You don't have to play act. There's no character that you have to be. And so to get to my final point on this for now, temporality. We exist sort of temporarily in the bar at Papeneiland. And the characters also exist both in their time in telling their story sort of in an interpretive way, but they also exist literally physically in the bar. However, not as a patron of the bar. So there's an interesting sort of liminal space between viewer and character that coexists while each narrative plays out as they sort of play a version of themselves in their little corner of the bar, and you engage with that in that sense. So ultimately, this is just one of the stories of Angels of Amsterdam. Thank you very much, Chris, for posting the website. I highly recommend viewing this if you can. It's playing at various film festivals. And if you'd like to know more about this, please do ask me later.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions because it's an enormously interesting experience. And as you said, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit more as well later. To us, it was of enormous importance to be able to have this focus group that you led. And we had a focus group with both the producers of this piece, with a number of VR researchers, and with the technical people who made the experience. So this led us to all kinds of really interesting discussions that, I would basically urge everyone to, as VR researchers, to step out into the world and talk to producers, because then you get these points that you're, while you may be theoretically thinking about all the possible options that VR can offer you, when you talk to the technical people and to the producers, you get a much more realistic idea about how things work and why things work. So that's basically something that we all need to move this whole field of VR research and theory forward to, that was my point earlier as well, not to sort of only get in our theoretical heads, but really check our ideas and insights with the people who are actually making it technically. Thanks, Kai. Questions, of course, will be possible later. Then, yes, let's move on to the next colleague, Marijn.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Am I good in sound? Perfect. Okay, fantastic. All right, so I'm very excited to be here. Just a short introduction. I'm doing a PhD at Stanford, and I'm really interested in specifically historical representation and how VR can be used for history and civic education. So that's also why I became super interested in the Book of Distance, the piece I'll talk about a little bit today, and I think has interesting resonance with both Wolves in the Wall and Angels of Amsterdam that we can discuss a bit later. So first of all, just an introduction to the piece. So the Book of Distance launched in 2020, and it's created by writer-director Rhonda Okita and the National Film Board of Canada. So the piece confronts the history of Japanese-Canadian internment during World War II by kind of reconstructing the life of Rhonda Okita's grandfather, who was called Yonezo Okita, and who left his home in Hiroshima, Japan in 1935 to start a new life in Canada, but was subsequently incarcerated in Canadian internment camps in the World War. So I have a lot to say about this piece in general, but for now, I'll say a little bit about this piece in relation to the questions that we posed and that we address. So in terms of our discussion, I think what's really interesting about the Book of Distance is that you do not assume the role of any particular historical character, but you are invited to be part of the story through interactive narrative devices. So what that means is basically that you never take on the role of Yonezo Okita or any of his family members directly, but you do engage and participate in activities similar to the one that they are engaging in. So for instance, you pack a suitcase to travel to Canada when Yonezo Okita is doing this. You help to build the wooden fence surrounding the farm, or you plant strawberry seeds in the soil. And in this way, you are led to explore the kind of life that the Okita family is leading and more kind of generally empathize with the story of Japanese Canadian rather than just the Okita family. And so at the same time, as you're kind of interacting and taking part in this historical narrative, you're also in this story as yourself, as a witness or an audience member. And this is because while the kind of the historical characters never really seem to see you or acknowledge you, there is one character that does actually see you and address you. And this is the Omniscient Narrator in the form of kind of a contemporary version of Randall Okita. So there's a narrator, Randall, who goes around and guides the piece. So this person, this narrator sees you, guides you, and asks you questions to kind of help you engage with the story, such as how would it feel to kind of build up a life? How would it feel to move? And the effect of this, I think, is that you are in two timelines at the same time. So in the historical timeline, you are not seen, but you are participating, although you're not directly interacting with historical characters. And in a contemporary timeline, you are directly seen and addressed as yourself or as a witness, as an audience by the storyteller. So I think that's kind of the first very interesting thing to note about interaction and interactivity in this piece. And a last thing that I would like to note for the purpose of our discussion is a shift that occurs halfway in the Book of Distance. So as you see in the top right picture, it's quite brightly colored, and this is how the beginning of the piece is set up. You engage in a lot of audience interaction, which you, by the way, also do with the hands that we kind of talked about a little bit, or that Christian talked about a little bit. So you get hands, and then you're allowed to plant seeds or to help build the fence. And then, as you see in the bottom right picture, the story becomes a lot darker when the Okita family is separated and Yonezo Okita is incarcerated in the Canadian internment camps. And at this point, you're also allowed to do less interactions and to participate less. You're mostly looking around, and even your gaze is obstructed sometimes by a shed where the Okita family is put in, or these kind of things. And I was fortunate enough to talk to writer-director Randall Okita about the shift and why this happened. And he told me that this reduction in audience interactions is meant to kind of communicate the lack of agency that Yonezo experienced in this part of his life. And I thought this was really interesting because in this way, it's not just the type of interactions, but also the frequency of interactions that is used to communicate kind of these life experiences of the historical characters. So to sum up real quick, some of the points that are interesting for our discussion later is that the only character in this narrative who clearly sees you is narrator Randall, who addresses you as yourself, as audience. But by engaging with activities similar to the ones that historical characters are engaging in, you are led to identify with the lives of the Japanese Canadians surrounding the era of World War II, more generally, so not just the Okita family. And last point is that the reduction of these interactions then signals this experience of having less control over your life, as we have also, as audience, less opportunities to participate in a narrative. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I hope my sound is a bit better. Quick check.
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
I'm somewhat screaming now. I think before we go on with the last example that we have, we should actually start the discussion right now, because it's so interesting to think about who am I and being seen. When Fable Studio did first tests with Henry, they realized that the audience feels somehow awkward, and Miriam introduced the Swayze effect. You're just a ghost, right? But this medium invites you to participate. It should not be that we are just observing all the time. That's the beauty when you go from 360 VR experiences to actually worlds where you can move around, when you can interact. And in Wolves in the Walls, this has been made one of the core aspects of it, that you first are just a ghost, because as an imaginary personality, you don't have a body, but you still have one in the narrative, and you are a part of the narrative by definition. You are not real, but at the same time, you are real, and what you perceive is real, which is exactly what Lucy is also talking about, right? No one in the family believes you, but you, as her imaginary friend, you are the one who believes her. And in Henry, they solved it by having Henry, the hedgehog, looking right at the interactor at some moment. So you cannot do anything, but at some point, you are acknowledged for being there. And that feels very, very powerful. Sky and Marijn, how does that relate to your examples?
Well, I think what you're saying is very interesting, Chris, because in Angels, you don't really have the option to interact in the traditional picking things up or clicking things or anything like that. So your only interaction is the gaze interaction, or in this case, the triggering the next sequence by staring at a circle. What is interesting, though, is that while that's sort of our traditional form of interaction where you do something and therefore something happens, you are acknowledged in the sense that each of these characters, once you trigger the sequence, tends to seek out eye contact with you. So you definitely exist in the scene and you are acknowledged by them, even if it's not in the same manner as sort of other experiences are.
Yes,
great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can speak a bit to the Book of Distance on this, because I think it overlaps really neatly. And I actually was thinking as you were speaking, Christian, that there is some overlap between Lucy and narrator Randall, because both of them are a little bit outside of the story, or at least in the screen share just stopped, but I think I paused it for too long. But both of them are sort of outside of the story, or at least in with a foot in both worlds in a little bit. And I think it's quite interesting that you are acknowledged by Randall, the narrator Randall, but you are not so much seen by the historical characters. And I think that's interesting, because it doesn't allow you to fully partake in the historical narrative, apart from the moment where, and this is something that I'm still thinking through, because there are moments where you're allowed to take photographs of the historical characters, and then actual photographs. So the story itself is a very graphic novel style animations, but then the actual photographs of the Okita family appear in front of you as you take a photograph of the animated characters. And this is a moment where they do look at you and they kind of wait for you to take the photo. And then the real world kind of moves back in with these photorealist photos that are actually taken from his personal photo album.
Interesting, thank you.
I will start sharing again. Let's see.
No, it's okay. I think it's nice to leave it off. Marijn, what kind of technology do you need to have at home? I mean, obviously a VR system, but does it require a strong computing power for that?
I'm not sure what it's running on now. I thought it might have also been running on the Quest, or like without that, you don't actually need the computer to back it up, just the all-in headsets. But that is a good question, because it is quite, I think in a way, it's quite a big file.
That's made such a big difference to the world of VR when the Quest opened up and a lot of stuff just became available in the Oculus store. At least for me, it had, because at some point you can overcome this awkwardness that you sometimes still have when you have to view a VR experience like in the outside world, and there's people around you who may be watching you. I think that the Angels of Amsterdam did a good job, because there you were pretty much exposed as well, but you were with 4 people at the same time, which somehow made it less weird. What I really thought was interesting about that as well, we talked about that in the focus group a lot, was so you in the VR you were seated in a bar, a bar 1700, right, Sky? Around 1700.
Yeah.
As a bar in Amsterdam, which of course for us is sort of still normal, because we have a lot of really old bars in Amsterdam that basically still look like that. But I imagine that for people who do not live in Amsterdam, that is like an interesting thing in itself to sit in a bar like that. But as the producer Avinash Changa told us, that he wanted people to give them some sort of embodiment experience as well, only in the simplest things. So the installation in iFilm Theater was basically that you sat down on a stool and you had a wooden bar that you could put your hands on. And for me, that made an enormous difference, because now you felt as you were really sitting there and holding onto the bar while you were looking around and being addressed by the characters, by the ladies, by the Angels of Amsterdam.
It's interesting, because this discussion brings us back to the beginning of this vision of the holodeck, and who would be able to afford a holodeck, right? So even if it would be possible, and we have cave installations or other things, it would still be something like a museum, where you actually have to go to a place, then to be transported to yet another virtual place.
Yeah.
Many of the works first are at festivals, indeed, and that's sometimes also a bit sad, but many of the festivals also run in parallel exhibitions that you can really just download. And yeah, more affordable headsets change the whole field. And before we even have this whole metaverse discussion, this is where it starts. Who is included, right? Who has access to this, and who not?
Yeah, very good point. So maybe it's time for you to talk about the last experience that you wanted to share with us, and some examples that come from that.
I will quickly introduce you the last one, which is like a completely different approach. Not sure if you're familiar with The Under Presents, which is something that's also on PC and the Quest. And it's a single and multiplayer experience, but they did something groundbreaking. They actually brought in real actors. And it's unfortunately not running right now, because it's a show. You go in the virtual reality to a theater, and there's a ticket shop, and then you buy your ticket there, and then you have to be there at the time when the show starts. And the story is that as an actress, and due to the pandemic, she cannot really practice for her Shakespearean appearance. And she asked the participants, like 6 players, and you see them, they're very abstract. They're these black figures, to help her go through the most important parts of the play. And it's really beautiful how this is a different kind of social experience. So you might have heard of the concept of presence, when you feel like you're present in the environment, like spatial presence. But social presence is, of course, even stronger when you know these beings are not simulated, they are real human beings. And this is what this brings in. And it's not as chaotic as VR chat or other social places, because it's guided. So scripting the interactor, you remember Janet Murray finds it very important that you know what you can do and what your role is done by the actor or actress, which is the one here in the background. There are props being used. You use magic to make things come alive. And it's yet another example that shows there's so much to explore and do before we need to have like even bigger dreams. Who has maybe experienced this here in this audience? Laura, you ask about the role of props in VR. In this particular case, props are very important, because your way of acting is rather limited. You only have your hands and your body movement. Surprisingly, this works really well already. You can show all kinds of emotions to others. They don't have voice acting. Only the actor, actress can actually talk. you have to listen, and then it's all about your embodiment, and props help you to be a role. Look at the picture. Here you see one is the princess, and gender doesn't matter, because if you get the princess props, you just play that role. Everyone also has a mask, and you can take this off, and if you use your other hand, you can make props appear, and you learn this magic. And that is, it's very interesting. The stagecraft is really baked into the whole experience here. Any questions, any comments from the panel maybe on this experience, and what you think about the future of actually sharing virtual environments to enact stories live?
I think it sounds very interesting. In a way, of course, as you already mentioned, the problem is that everyone has to be present at a certain time, right? But on the other hand, that's not something that we find difficult when we engage in a normal theater play. So it seems that the worlds of interactive theater, VR, and normal theater are sort of coming together here. And I think that's a very interesting option that, of course, has not been explored that much yet. However, then you immediately get to the problem again of the availability. I remember there was a Alice in Wonderland VR experience in a couple of years ago, and I had so much wanted to see it, because that was something. It was on location, and apparently you had to put on a headset and then meet the actors in real time there in the theater. But I was too late with trying to get a ticket, and I really tried, so I never experienced it. And that is such a disappointing factor about these real-time experiences. So maybe people should, have like an ongoing show in something, in a thing like that, and especially when there's a verdienmodel, a way of earning money with it, when the interactors actually have to buy a ticket, and so there would be even a budget to pay actors to be there, say, every evening you play from home. Yeah. So yeah, that will be my take on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if I can jump on real briefly. Yeah, what I think is really interesting about this, because I've seen something like this before. In New York, there was a group of stand-up comedians, kind of, they were all, the founder was based in New York, but they were all over the world actually, and they would meet in VR to play stand-up, and they would invite someone who didn't know the narrative. And what I just wanted to highlight about this, what I found really interesting, is that all the stand-up comedians could really experiment with their identity, in the sense that they could form their body into, in a really big kind of monstrous figure, or in a very small fly, and they could change. And I think that brought a really kind of different dynamic to theater. So not just thinking about, okay, how can VR improve when we bring theater, but also what can VR bring to theater itself in terms of the experimentation with the embodiment.
Speaking of embodiment, not only the interactors actually embody someone. A trend that we will see in the future is that characters, for instance, Lucy from Wolves and the Walls, will also have their virtual body and get out of the world and go into other worlds, in the sense of transmedia. And that's exactly what the company was also doing. At one, I think at Sundance, Lucy, the character, the AI, was presenting her own little work that she supposedly created, and she was interacting in the chat. So that is something very interesting, that characters from different worlds might come alive, seemingly alive, and interact with each other. And maybe that is part of the metaverse that we're going to see, that you can meet them also outside of this one particular experience.
Chris, I see there's a Q&A box in our menu, and Sharif has asked the question. The immersion in VR is definitely a strong aspect, as we were talking about, but how can VR improve the interactive narrative elements seen in a video game? Do you feel like picking that up? It seems very much also connected to the minor that you're teaching at the HKU, the Utrecht University of the Arts.
Well, of course, I open this question to everyone, but the embodiment that we spoke about is such a strong driver, because instead of just using a controller to be the character, you move your own body, and that is especially strong in the Tempest, but also in Wolves in the Walls. You can act, right? You could move, but there is no real audience. When you're with other people, you know that you're seen for real. And it's not just fake acknowledgement, it's real acknowledgement and direct interaction. So you ask, how can VR improve upon the interactive narrative elements? I think if it allows for more role-playing and not just pressing a button to perform something, but to actually perform it yourself, this will be a huge change in what we've seen in entertainment, but also edutainment.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I'm thinking about the examples that I used in the introduction, and it's of a different level, but when you mention the medium of video games, that of course we're used, to look at our screen and to guide our characters around and not be that much involved. However, there's some examples of video games where the fourth wall is broken, where actually the video game character looks at you, looks at the screen, urges you to do something. For instance, if you pause too long, then they'll just nudge at you. Okay, should you be doing something? It doesn't happen that often. This breaking of the fourth wall is nowadays, it used to be something that was more or less not done in television. There's still this sort of this magic circle, that the characters at the screen, they do not look into the camera. However, in certain television series, there's been some changes in that. And I think that is what virtual reality almost urges the characters and the designers and you as an interactor to get into that field as well, because all of a sudden the breaking of the fourth wall is much more logical, because you're more or less as an interactor, you're together with the characters within the screen, within the walls. The Alice in Wonderland piece, through what is called down the rabbit hole. As an interactor, you have a very interesting role there when you compare it to what you do in video games, because basically you do the same things. You guide the little girl character around, and she has to follow other characters, a rabbit and what have you. But also you are capable of turning the whole play field around. So you, as the title suggests, you fall down a rabbit hole, and then the rabbit hole is all around you. So you are capable of just turning the whole world up and down, and also moving back to scenes that you've already seen. So here the third wall almost becomes, or the fourth wall almost becomes like a cylinder. It's a cylinder around you that you can constantly interact with, and that is quite permeable. So that's also something that while the down the rabbit hole is basically a video game sort of setting, by adding this extra option of giving you as a player, as an interactor, the possibility to turn the whole game world around you, it has definitely added something to the narrative possibilities of more traditional video games that you play on a flat screen.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here.
Sure, please do.
Yeah, I found it really interesting what you were saying about the fourth wall, because I think that's a really good point, how connected it is to VR. And I found it really interesting in the Book of Distance as well, because I'm also linking back to the earlier discussion we had about theater. So in the Book of Distance, the piece is kind of set up as a theater piece. So there's red curtains, there's spotlights, and the narrator Randall actually comes in and draws the set for you. He moves around props, he draws boundaries, and it's a very, it's a continuous breaking of the fourth wall. It's continuously kind of setting up the stage and showing how it's all made and it's all scripted, and you're here really to invite you to come and be part of this theater piece. And that's just something I found really interesting in the piece, how it's connected so much to theater studies.
Yeah. So I saw that Jens has urged us to sort of start, ending our session. So maybe we can still, to summarize, make a quick round. I mean, the question that we set out was what based on or inspired by Janet Murray, that VR does not give an exact replacement of the real world, but with the virtual world. Maybe all of you can just in mention one point. So what does the VR experience that you've discussed, what is its best feature that sort of gives the interactor the feeling that the real world is replaced with the virtual world? What is its very special asset that we would like propose as a best practice for VR producers to use, to at least to consider using in new experiences? Marijn, do you wanna start?
Sure. So a feature showing that the real world is substituted, kind of that you're entering a different space.
At least gives that feeling, or gives that suggestion that you're actually there. So what is the most immersive feature of the piece that you've discussed? Or maybe if you want to think about it a little bit, we can move to Christian, who has, or Sky.
I'm happy with going first, because I think the beautiful part about this particular experience is that it's not quite photorealistic, so it's slightly off, but you exist both in this cafe that is really done a one-to-one, and you get to lean on that bar while you observe these experiences. But you also have these characters that are lifelike enough and have enough human qualities, and who also look very much at you because they're captured that way with both eyes, that you exist and you don't exist, and everything is almost dreamlike because it's just slightly off. So I think that would be best practice there.
Great, thanks. Great insight. Chris?
What I really like about the examples is that they allow to perform, and that you become part of the story, and you're not just the ghost that is observing, but you are really a character in the story. And of course, when you are there with other humans, many stories also emerge out of situations that you could not have foreseen. And that creates a very playful social experience, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope everyone can enjoy one of these things.
Wonderful. So Marijn, would you please?
Yeah, I'll real quick.
A real quick final note.
So in the Book of Distance, how it starts is that you get to throw a horseshoe. So you get to pick it up and you get to throw it towards the pitter. And the moment you throw it, narrator Randall appears and he says, actually, you have to throw it more in one movement from your hip. And you're like, oh, he actually saw how I was throwing or not. And of course it's an illusion, but he gives you the sense that he saw your movements and he's responding to you directly. And
that's
I thought
very
that was
strong acknowledgement indeed. That's so interesting. Well, Jens, I think we managed to keep it exactly in the timing that you proposed to us.
Yeah, so very nice. And Sky, Christian, Marijn, Miriam, thank you so much for having this great panel here. And to everybody, please meet the panelists now in Gather Town in the Q&A track of the Piazza. If you have trouble finding that, just search for my name, for Jens Kubert, and you can follow me, and you should all meet at the same place. And then we hope to continue the discussion over there. So thank you so much, and see you there in a few minutes.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending.